Gabriel García Márquez's 100 Years of Solitude, first published in 1967, follows several generations of the Buendía family in the fictional town of Macondo. Through their repeated experiences of love, ambition, war, discovery, loss, and isolation, the novel creates a sweeping portrait of a family and a community caught in recurring patterns of history. Garcia Márquez's literary style is famous for its use of magical realism, blending extraordinary and supernatural events with everyday life as though they are completely ordinary. His rich, imaginative prose combines myth, history, humor, tragedy, and political commentary. The novel explores themes of solitude, family, memory, fate, love, time, political violence, progress, and the repetition of history. 100 Years of Solitude remains important for its enormous influence on world literature and its distinctive portrayal of how individuals, families, and societies can become trapped in cycles of memory, desire, and history. The story starts with Colonel Aureliano Buendía remembering the early days of Macondo, the isolated village founded by his father, José Arcadio Buendía. In those first years, Macondo is young, orderly, and untouched by death. Bands of gypsies visit from time to time, bringing inventions that seem almost magical to the villagers. Their leader, Melquiades, feeds José Arcadio Buendía's hunger for discovery, and the founder becomes obsessed with magnets, alchemy, scientific experiments, and anything that promises hidden knowledge. José Arcadio Buendía's curiosity gradually turns into isolation. His wife, Úrsula Iguarán, is practical and grounded, while he withdraws into impossible projects. He searches for ways to connect Macondo to the outside world, but when he decides the village is surrounded by water and should be moved, Úrsula refuses to leave. Forced back toward family life, he turns his attention to his sons, the powerful José Arcadio and the quiet, mysterious Aureliano. The story then moves back to the origins of the family. José Arcadio Buendía and Úrsula are cousins, and Úrsula fears that their children may be born with deformities because of their blood relation. After a man named Prudencio Aguilar mocks José Arcadio Buendía's masculinity, Buendía kills him. Haunted by Prudencio's ghost, he and Úrsula leave their old village. After months of wandering, they found Macondo. As Macondo grows, the family expands. José Arcadio, still young, is seduced by Pilar Ternera, who becomes pregnant. Before the child is born, he falls for a gypsy girl and disappears with the gypsies. Úrsula tries to follow him and returns months later with an important discovery. Macondo is not as cut off as everyone thought. A route through the swamp connects the village to civilization. Pilar gives birth to José Arcadio's son, Arcadio. An orphan girl named Rebecca also arrives mysteriously at the Buendía house and is raised as part of the family. Rebecca brings with her an insomnia plague that spreads through Macondo and causes memory loss. To fight forgetting, the villagers label objects and even put up signs reminding themselves of basic truths. The plague ends only when Melquiades, believed dead, returns with a cure. He brings the daguerreotype, and José Arcadio Buendía becomes determined to photograph God. The central government eventually reaches Macondo in the form of Don Apolinar Moscote, a magistrate who tries to impose authority over the village. José Arcadio Buendía resists him, but Aureliano falls in love with Moscote's young daughter, Remedios. At the same time, Rebecca and Amaranta both fall in love with Pietro Crespi, an elegant stranger who comes to install a pianola in the Buendía house. Pietro chooses Rebecca, and Amaranta, consumed by jealousy, vows to stop their wedding. Melquiades dies again and becomes the first person to die in Macondo. Soon after, José Arcadio Buendía loses his mind. He becomes convinced that time is repeating itself, destroys parts of the house, and has to be tied to a chestnut tree in the backyard, where he remains for years. Remedios marries Aureliano and brings brief happiness to the household, but she dies suddenly, plunging the family back into mourning. The return of the grown José Arcadio disrupts everything. Huge, tattooed, and physically overwhelming, he captivates Rebecca. She abandons Pietro Crespi, begins an affair with José Arcadio, and marries him. Úrsula is furious and banishes them from the house. Pietro then turns toward Amaranta, but she rejects him cruelly despite loving him. In despair, he kills himself. Amaranta burns her hand in guilt and wears a black bandage for the rest of her life. Political violence now enters Macondo. Aureliano, angered by conservative corruption and fraud, joins the liberal cause. When conservative troops occupy the town, he leads a rebellion and becomes Colonel Aureliano Buendía. Over the years, he fathers 17 sons across the country and leads many uprisings. He leaves Arcadio in charge of Macondo, but Arcadio becomes a harsh dictator. After the conservatives retake the town, Arcadio is executed by firing squad, leaving behind children with Santa Sofia de la Piedad, Remedios the Beauty, Aureliano II, and José Arcadio II. Colonel Aureliano Buendía is captured and sentenced to death, but his brother José Arcadio saves him at the last moment. The colonel continues fighting, but the wars slowly hollow him out. He wins and loses, rises and falls, and eventually realizes that he is no longer fighting for ideals, but for pride. His closest friend, Colonel Gabriel Marquez, also loses faith in the war. When Aureliano finally signs a peace treaty, he feels he has betrayed the liberal cause and tries to kill himself, but survives. The Buendia family suffers one loss after another. José Arcadio dies mysteriously, and Rebecca withdraws into lifelong solitude. Gabriel Marquez loves Amaranta for years, but she refuses him just as she refused Pietro. José Arcadio Buendía, still tied beneath the tree, finally dies, and yellow flowers fall from the sky in mourning. In the next generation, the twins José Arcadio II and Aureliano II grow into very different men. José Arcadio II becomes solitary and restless, while Aureliano II embraces pleasure and excess. Both sleep with Petra Cotes at first, but Aureliano II remains with her, and their passion mysteriously makes their animals wildly fertile. He becomes rich and fills Macondo with parties, food, music, and extravagance. José Arcadio II tries to open a route to the sea and succeeds only once, bringing a boat loaded with French prostitutes and the energy of carnival. During the celebration, Remedios the Beauty is named queen. She is so beautiful that men lose their reason over her, but she herself remains innocent, indifferent, and untouched by ordinary desire. Later, she rises into the air and disappears into heaven. At the carnival, Fernanda del Carpio appears as a rival queen. She has been raised to believe she belongs to aristocratic greatness, though her family's glory is fading. Aureliano II becomes obsessed with her, finds her in her gloomy hometown, and marries her. Their marriage is miserable. Fernanda is rigid, religious, and proud, while Aureliano II remains devoted to pleasure and continues his affair with Petra Cotes. Fernanda tries to remake the Buendia house into a formal aristocratic household. She and Aureliano II have children, Meme, José Arcadio, and Amaranta Úrsula. Modernity arrives in Macondo through the railroad. Foreign products, cinema, phonographs, and outsiders transform the town. Then a foreign banana company settles nearby and creates its own fenced-off world. Macondo becomes prosperous and chaotic, but the company also brings exploitation and violence. Colonel Aureliano Buendía regrets ending his wars when he sees foreign power and conservative authority working together. After he threatens to fight again with his 17 sons, assassins murder all but one of those sons, shooting them through the permanent ash crosses on their foreheads. Úrsula grows very old and blind, though she hides it by knowing the habits of everyone in the house. The family continues to decay. Colonel Aureliano withdraws into his workshop, making and melting down tiny golden fish until he finally dies. Amaranta, having lived in regret and loneliness, finishes sewing her own shroud and announces the exact time of her death. After her death, Úrsula retreats to bed and rarely rises. Meme, the daughter of Aureliano II and Fernanda, grows up lively like her father, but is controlled by Fernanda. She falls in love with Mauricio Babilonia, a mechanic from the banana company, who is always followed by yellow butterflies. Fernanda discovers the relationship and has a guard posted. When Mauricio sneaks into the house to see Meme, the guard shoots him, leaving him paralyzed for life. Meme is traumatized into silence, and Fernanda sends her to a convent. Months later, a nun brings Meme's baby to the Buendia house. Fernanda hides the child in Coronel Aureliano's old workshop and pretends he is a foundling. He is named Aureliano. José Arcadio II, meanwhile, organizes banana workers to strike against brutal working conditions. The government tricks more than 3,000 workers into gathering for a meeting, then surrounds them with soldiers and kills them with machine guns. The bodies are loaded onto a train and dumped into the sea. José Arcadio II, mistaken for dead, escapes the train and returns to Macondo, only to find that everyone denies the massacre ever happened. A rain begins that night and continues for almost 5 years, washing away physical evidence and helping erase the truth from public memory. During the endless rain, the Buendia house rots and Aureliano II loses his fortune as the animals die in the floods. He becomes quieter and spends time with the children, including hidden Aureliano. Fernanda writes to invisible doctors and torments her husband. José Arcadio II hides in Melquiades' old room, studying the gypsies' manuscripts and preserving the memory of the massacre that the town refuses to remember. When the rain finally stops, Macondo is ruined, the banana company is gone, and the town seems to slide backward into abandonment. Úrsula briefly tries to restore the house, then dies at more than 120 years old. Rebecca dies too. Aureliano II, now poor and sick, devotes himself to raising money to send Amaranta Úrsula to Europe. José Arcadio II continues teaching young Aureliano the history of Macondo and the mystery of Melquiades' prophecies. The twins die at the same moment, and their coffins are accidentally switched, so each is buried in the other's grave. Aureliano remains in Melquiades' laboratory, learning that the manuscripts are written in Sanskrit and can only be deciphered when they are 100 years old. Santa Sofia de la Piedad, after decades of quiet service, finally walks away from the family. Fernanda dies in nostalgia and bitterness. Her son José Arcadio returns from Europe, having never become the priest his mother imagined. He finds hidden gold, wastes it in debauchery, and briefly forms a connection with Aureliano before local boys murder him in his bath and steal the treasure. Amaranta Úrsula returns from Europe with her husband Gaston, full of energy and determined to revive Macondo, but the town is already beyond saving. Aureliano falls in love with her, continuing the family's repeating pattern of incestuous desire. He tries to distract himself with books, scholars, prostitutes, and the wisdom of the ancient Pilar Ternera, but eventually he confesses his love. Amaranta Úrsula gives in, and they begin a passionate affair. Gaston leaves for Belgium to pursue business plans, and after learning of the affair, does not return. As Macondo empties out, and the Buendia house falls apart, Aureliano and Amaranta Úrsula live almost entirely inside their love. Red ants overrun the property. Amaranta Úrsula gives birth to a son, also named Aureliano, and the old family fear finally comes true. The baby is born with a pig's tail. Amaranta Úrsula bleeds to death after childbirth. Aureliano, devastated and drunk, neglects the baby. When he returns, he finds ants carrying away the child's body. At last, Aureliano understands that the Buendia line has ended. He locks himself inside the ruined house and finally deciphers Melquiades' manuscripts. They contain the entire history of the family, written long before the events occurred. As Aureliano reads, the prophecy describes the very act of his reading. Around him, a great wind begins to destroy Macondo, tearing the town from the earth and erasing it from memory. The story ends with the realization that the Buendías were always destined to complete their lonely cycle and vanish forever.